Alright, so you just created an intent in the main activity of the Miwok app. But the code that we use to create an intent in the Miwok app looks different from the way we created an intent in the Just Java app. So in the last course, we started to learn about intents, but we didn't fully discuss all the types of intents. So there are actually two types of intents, implicit and explicit intents. You use an implicit intent when you don't know which component or even which app will handle your intent. For example, in a social media app, you can send an intent to allow a user to take a photo. It doesn't matter which camera app receives the intent, as long as the app can take a photo. On the other hand, you should create an explicit intent when you know exactly which app component or activity should handle the intent. For example, in the Miwok app, from the main screen, when you click on a category, we want to send an explicit intent to the numbers activity within our app to open that screen. It doesn't make sense to let any other activity handle this. So now let's review each case in more detail. You can use an implicit intent in the Just Java app to open an email app to send off an order summary. It didn't matter which email app received the intent, as long as it was an email app that could take our message subject and body and send it off as an email. Remember that by specifying an intent filter in their Android manifest file, apps like this email app announce which intents they can receive and handle. Another example of an implicit intent is when you want to open up a website in your app. You can send an intent to a browser app to show the website. It doesn't matter which browser app handles the intent. They are all capable of showing a website. So this type of flexibility that we get with intents is great when you aren't sure what apps the user has on their device. Remember back to our metaphor of throwing a ball, which represented our intent. It didn't matter who we were throwing it at, as long as someone was there to catch it. And this represented an implicit intent. Sometimes we want to be 100% sure that when we send an intent, a particular component will receive it. For example, within the Miwok app, clicking on a category sends an explicit intent that opens up a new activity, displaying vocab words in that category. So another example of this is the Google Play Music app. In the top level activity, you see an overview of your music, and clicking on an album launches the track container activity, which contains a list of tracks by a specific artist. So this activity is within the same music app. In cases like these, we are using an explicit intent, explicitly stating exactly what activity should open when intent is given to the Android system. So back to the metaphor of throwing a ball. For explicit intents, it's like we're shouting the name of a person we know is on the other side and know is open to catching the ball. It's important to note that you should almost never use explicit intents to open a third-party app because we can't guarantee that the particular third-party app we intend to call is actually installed on the device. So for this reason, explicit intents are usually used within the same application because the developer knows what activities are available. Alright, so now we know there's two types of intents. And let's review what's inside the ball, which represents our intent. Implicit intents generally need an action and a data URI. We can also add in category, components, and extra information to help the Android system determine which app would best handle this request. Explicit intents already know where they need to go, so it provides very specific information. We usually just need to pass the context and component, which is usually the class we want to navigate to. However, there are situations where we may want to set the data URI so that the other activity can receive certain information. Let's look at the code for these two types of intents. So this is an example of an implicit intent and an example of an explicit intent. What similarities and differences do you see? For similarities, in both cases, we create object instances of the intent class, and then we eventually pass the intent as an input to the start activity method. And the two big differences are, notice the different constructor inputs. Implicit intent required an action string, such as action_view or action_send, to announce what generic action the app is needing. Explicit intents can directly name the class component they need to open. Secondly, for implicit intents, we have this resolve activity if block, which catches cases where there aren't any apps on the device to handle the intent request. So to recap, for the implicit intent, we need to create an object instance of the intent class, and in the constructor, we pass in an action string, and in this case, it's action send to. The implicit intent also has this resolve activity if block. On the other hand, to build and fire off that explicit intent, we make a new instance of the intent class, passing in the context and the activity we want to open. Then we call start activity, passing in the intent instance we just built. So as a disclaimer, I want to note that this particular implicit intent example uses intent extras, while this explicit intent example doesn't. But remember that both types of intents are capable of handling intent extras. So now let's practice what you just learned. In the following scenarios, determine whether we use an implicit or an explicit intent. For each case, should we create an explicit or implicit intent? In case number 1, popular group texting apps allow users to open video links that they receive in chat messages. Should opening a video player use an implicit or explicit intent? In case number 2, in a food ordering app, a user selects the dishes that she wants to order and clicks the Submit Order button. The app then moves from the order activity to the order summary activity. Should moving to the order summary activity use an implicit or explicit intent? And in case number 3, ride-sharing apps allow users to contact their drivers via text messaging. Should accessing a text messaging app on the phone use an implicit or explicit intent?